This is a comic that I found when I was digging through back issues at my local comic shop. It's called the HalfCenturyWar, and it's one of those things that just hits different because we don't get many stories that take place over such a long period of time or that have this kind of scope. So let's take a look at why this old series is still so great. First off, it's a mini-series consisting of 5 issues where each issue takes place 10 years apart, starting in 1954 and ending in 2004. So we see the world change quite a bit during this time period. And yet it's also a story about how we either adapt or fail to adapt to the continued threat of Godzilla. The main character is named Corporal Shiro Hibino, who gets drafted into the Japanese military just after graduating high school in 1954. And he's only 18 years old when he first witnesses Godzilla's rampage through Tokyo. During the attack, Shiro ends up separated from his unit and has to hide under a desk in an office building until the military can clear out the radioactive rubble. Fast forward 10 years to 1964, and Shiro is now a full-fledged veteran, having seen combat in Korea. He's older, wiser, more cynical, and definitely not thrilled about being sent to fight another monster. But there's no denying that Godzilla's attacks are becoming more frequent. In fact, by the year 1974, people have become so jaded that the government censors footage of the most recent attack because they do not want to cause panic. This leads to some conspiracy theories that perhaps Godzilla isn't real, but the military knows otherwise. By 1984, Shiro has risen to the rank of Sergeant Major and is training new recruits. His jaded attitude hasn't changed much, but he does care about teaching these young men how to survive. Meanwhile, a new weapon has been developed to help defend against Godzilla. It's called the Super High Frequency Oscillating Blade, which sounds like something from Power Rangers. But apparently it can actually disrupt the electrical activity in Godzilla's brain. But in 1994, Godzilla evolves. He becomes even more powerful and regenerates faster than ever before. In fact, the only way to kill him is to destroy his brainstem. And doing so requires the combined efforts of multiple nuclear bombs. Meanwhile, our old friend Shiro is still around. He's now a grizzled old master sergeant, and this final battle with Godzilla will be his last. He goes out in a blaze of glory, giving his life so that the younger soldiers can live. And then finally, we have the year 2004, which means it's been 50 years since that first attack. And for the first time ever, humans are able to repel Godzilla's assault. They even managed to capture him alive. However, they need to transport this enormous creature across the ocean to an isolated island where they plan on containing him. That's easier said than done, obviously. And they end up enlisting the help of the United Nations Kaiju Task Force, which is led by none other than Major Geno Hibino, Shiro's son. Like father, like son. Now, the plot is really simple, right? All we have is a guy who keeps getting dragged back into fighting Godzilla every 10 years. But what makes this story work is the scope. We get to see how the world changes throughout the decades. For example, in the very first issue, people talk about how Godzilla is just a movie monster. By the 5th issue, we see how that perspective has completely changed. People now refer to Godzilla as the Big G, and it's common knowledge that he's real. This also tells us a lot about how people feel towards these monsters. In the beginning, people were afraid, but they didn't know how to defend themselves. So they were kind of helpless. By the end, they had developed all kinds of weapons to try and defend against the Kaiju, but they were still willing to use nuclear weapons as a last resort. And they even started capturing them alive. So we see people go from victims to fighters to hunters. And it also shows how this would affect the soldiers involved. Shiro witnesses firsthand how these attacks become more and more destructive over the years. And that's bound to weigh on your mind. At the same time, it's his duty to protect his country, and he takes that responsibility seriously, even though he would probably rather be doing something else. Shiro is basically the average Joe who finds himself in extraordinary circumstances. He doesn't want to be there, but he feels like he has no choice. And that's relatable. Shiro also shows how fighting in these wars can affect someone mentally. He becomes more and more cynical, bitter and jaded over the years. By the end of the story, he's a shell of his former self. He's lost faith in humanity and seems to have given up on everything. As for the action, well, there's not a ton of it. This isn't exactly a fast-paced story. There's plenty of downtime where we see Shiro hanging out with his fellow soldiers, drinking, and just talking about life. This is especially true in the second issue. But when the action does happen, it's pretty good. There are plenty of kaiju battles here, and they're always pretty exciting. There's a good mix of big set pieces and more intimate moments, like when Shiro hides under a desk while Godzilla stomps around Tokyo. The artwork in this series is pretty good too. Each issue is drawn by a different team, so the styles vary a bit. But they all do a good job of making the kaiju look terrifying. Even though we've been fighting Godzilla for decades, he still looks scary. And the destruction caused by these monsters never gets old. All in all, this is a really interesting story that I wish we saw more often. What if? Alternate history videos are popular on YouTube, and they generally follow this type of format. You take real historical events, and then you map them onto the Godzilla universe. For example, what if Godzilla attacked during the Cuban Missile Crisis? What if King Kong showed up in World War II? These scenarios are fun to think about, but they're also thought-provoking. They make you consider how these events would affect the course of history. Godzilla is obviously a metaphor for nuclear war and the dangers of unchecked scientific progress. But these stories show another side of the kaiju as well. They also represent the unknown, the uncontrollable forces that shape our world. Godzilla may be a metaphor, but he's also a mystery, and that's what makes him so compelling. So if you want to check out this series, you can find it over at Comixology. It's not very expensive, and it's definitely worth a read. As always, thanks for watching. You've been watching MonsterMayhemMedia, where stories meet imagination. Don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic insights.